Are you a scaling SaaS founder?
Ready to make the leap from leading a team to leading an organization? Join us each week as we refill your think tank with actionable tips and strategies from great business minds you know and those who don't know yet. This is SaaS Fuel with your host, 5-time entrepreneur, SaaS founder, and globetrotting adventurer, Jeff Maines.
Welcome back to the SaaS Fuel podcast, where we treat every challenge like trick-or-treating. Knock on enough doors, and you're bound to find the sweetest solutions. I'm your host, Jeff Maines. I help B2B SaaS founders like you grow from traction to scale. Here, growth is more than just numbers. It's about crafting a future-proof company, premium valuation, and leaders who build a business of significance while living epic, adventurous lives. I feel like your sales and marketing teams are living in different horror movies. Sales is running from zombies while marketing is fighting vampires and nobody's winning. Yeah, last week I watched a founder try to referee between sales and marketing like they were arch nemesis locked into a battle for the ages. Here's the thing about sales and marketing. Like every classic monster movie where humanity has to band together to fight the real enemy, missed revenue targets and dying pipelines, for example, in this case. But most companies are still operating like the departments are separate universes, creating their own version of a B2B twilight zone. Let me share something frightening. Companies with misaligned sales and marketing teams are losing over 10% of their revenue annually. That's scarier than any horror film I've seen. But there's hope for those brave enough to face these monsters head on. First off, we want to create a unified battle plan. Stop treating your funnel like it's trying to trap two different movie villains. Sales and marketing need to agree on what makes a qualified lead. Like monster hunters agreeing what makes a real vampire. Define your ideal customer profile together and create shared success metrics. And for goodness sakes, use the same CRM. I've seen that multiple times where marketing is doing their own thing in one and sales is doing another. I don't get it. But united we stand, divided we fall into the revenue abyss. Next up, we want to make sure that you're aligning your weapons arsenal. Ensure your content and sales tools work together. They're like silver bullets and wooden stakes, maybe. Marketing shouldn't be creating content in a vacuum while sales cobbles together their own materials, like Dr. Frankenstein. Build a feedback loop where sales insights inform marketing content and marketing materials actually help close deals. They have to be connected. It's a novel concept, right? Third is to build a war room, not separate bunkers. Create shared spaces for regular collaboration. This can be online or in person, but weekly syncs, shared dashboards, and joint planning sessions are not just meetings, they're your gatherings to fight off growth stealing monsters. When sales and marketing share intelligence like survivors in a monster movie, everyone lives to fight another day. And here's the plot twist. Companies with tightly aligned sales and marketing teams see 36% higher customer retention and 38% higher sales win rates. They're not just surviving, they're kicking the growth stealing monsters right in the teeth. So here's your mission, brave soul. Break down those departmental walls like they're cursed barriers. Create one revenue team with one mission, hunting down and capturing market share like your business depends on it, because it does. Remember, in this nightmare landscape of missed quotas and marketing qualified leads that aren't really qualified, alignment isn't just a nice to have, it's your only hope for survival. Now go forth and unite your teams. Our founder on Tuesday was Brian Parks, founder of Bigfoot Capital. He was the founding CEO of Brandfolder and had a 9-figure exit in 2020. We talked a lot about funding options, and there are lots of them. The pros and cons of each one, mistakes founders make in funding, and a few train wrecks or gotchas to watch out for. And our expert guest last week was Naomi Soman, storyteller extraordinaire. She works for SimilarWeb, where she writes all the copy for the PPC team. But Naomi goes deep to capture stories that really matter and make a brand worth believing in. We talked about how to make a compelling superhero origin story, why it matters, and then how to use your story to drive extraordinary performance. If you missed either one of those episodes, go back and give them a listen. My guest today is Andy Culligan. Andy is a marketing leader with a sales mindset. I mean, he's a brilliant marketer who closes the gap between marketing and sales to fuel revenue growth. Bringing nearly a decade of experience in MarTech to the table, he provides fast-growing SaaS startups with the strategy they need to confound competitors and captivate customers. Get ready to learn from the go-to CMO for scaling SaaS business, Andy Culligan. Hey, Andy, welcome to SaaS Fuel.
Thanks so much for having me on, Jeff.
Well, tell me a little bit about your journey from starting as an SDR to Global Director of Demand Gen, VP, and now fractional CMO.
Yeah, all right. So as people may or may not hear, I'm Irish. I grew up in Ireland, born and bred, but I moved to Austria 15 years ago. Let's say I followed my heart. Let's say, right.
That's great.
That's a personal background on me. But I started I studied marketing, right. However, in the lead up to studying and also throughout all of my student jobs, everything was always sales. When I was in school, I was always doing some sales job during the summertime. When I was in uni, I was always doing some sales job during the year or whatever. So sales was always sort of like a natural thing for me. It was never really a foreign thing, which you would get for many marketers, not all marketers, but and I left uni and I just went directly into SDR world, as you just mentioned, and really enjoyed it. It was tough, right? It was back in 2008, and we didn't have as many of the tools and technology as what SDRs have nowadays. I didn't even have a CRM. We had a Excel file and a telephone and an email, and it was go get them, and it was great. It was good fun, And then I did well at that, and then I got promoted to be an AE, and then I moved over to Austria in 2009, and I sort of took a couple of steps down the ladder from there again because I moved to a country where I didn't speak the language, etc. But then I took on a job in German, an SDR job in German, which, as you can imagine, doing an SDR job in a language that you can't speak is relatively difficult.
That's a tough place to be.
I would say, in terms of levels of difficulties, probably advanced is probably the best way to put it. But so did that, wasn't very successful, as you can imagine. But I still managed to stay with the same company for a bit longer, and then I decided then that I wanted to go into marketing, and I ended up then working for a multinational which had I don't know how many thousand people globally, and I very quickly became a champion for their marketing and sales software. So back then I was using Marketo and HubSpot. Now this is 2010, so this is at the beginning. That's beginning really early. Cloud and marketing automation and everything. Yeah. So I very quickly became the only person in Austria that had that knowledge. It was there was very few people. Now I said the only person, but there was very, very few people. And I'd worked with this multinational for a number of years. After being the global champion there, somebody from a tech company was looking at my profile, a company called Emarsis, and that person was his chief operating officer, a guy called Ohad Hecht. And Ohad consequently then became the CEO of Emarsis, and he led them to an exit then with SAP then in 2023, or 2022. And Ohad anyway was looking at my profile on LinkedIn, and I just texted him and said, "Why are you looking at my profile?" And then very quickly I found myself in a job at Emarsis, and that's when my career really started to accelerate, I would say. So as you mentioned there, I eventually ended up in Emarsis as the global director of Demand Gen, and Emarsis at that point was 2,000 people. And I was then running effectively a global team. So we had people in each major market, and we were selling into e-commerce and retailers. And it was a high ticket SaaS company, right? Anybody who's familiar with it, that space is incredibly competitive. You've got many, many, many companies all competing in that mid-market to upper mid-market space. And at the time that I joined the organization, we had just received about 65 million in funding to go into the US. And being in marketing, to receive that amount of money to go fund, was a great playground for me, let's say. I learned a lot of things. I probably learned a lot of things what not to do, but there was a lot of I think that was for everyone involved. We had hired a US marketing team based out of San Francisco in May. That entire team was then gone by September. there was like, and we sort of, I think we'd gone a bit crazy, right? We tried to do everything, and it didn't work, right? I think it's safe to say it didn't really work too well. So the leadership team at Emarsis pulled back, and I quite very quickly found myself in a position of being one of the only marketers left on the global team, with a number of other marketers that probably didn't have as much experience as I did, and I just sort of put up my hand and just started working hard and proving myself and showing that I could do things. Very quickly, then they brought in a fractional CMO, and I helped that person build the team, right? And from there, like really good things started happening for me. And then after a number of years, then I left the VP, or I left that position to join with a much smaller organization that were in the same competitive space that I mentioned, a company called Exponia, which then had an exit to Bloomreach, who you may or may not be familiar with, headless CMS. But the CDP component, customer data platform component of that, is Exponia. But I joined Exponia when we were probably at around 5 million in revenue, and I left there when we just hit over 20 million in revenue a couple of years later. So you can imagine we've seen massive growth in a very short space of time.
Yes.
So, and grew the global team there massively as well. Followed the Emarsis model, which I had before because it was in a direct competitive space, right? And then I left there, went into volume SaaS. So I was a CMO then at a company called Leadfeeder. And I was there for a number of years, and the volume SaaS model was interesting. Right, I wasn't used to the volume SaaS model. What was interesting for me was to take the high ticket SaaS model and try to do something with that in volume, which not a lot of volume SaaS marketers were doing. So, yeah, like I came in and the team were a bit scratching their heads at me a little bit, because I was like, okay, well, like we're bringing in all of these top of funnel signups to the app, but are those top of funnel signups actually turning into paying customers? And like, how are we monitoring that all the way down through the funnel? And I was surprised that like it wasn't really something we were focusing on too much. We were too focused on trial signups and not focused enough on revenue. So it was like the growth focus was based on top of funnel numbers rather than bottom of funnel numbers. And I was coming from the thing was like, I'd rather cut the leads in half and see stuff turn into money at the end.
Right.
And that's essentially what I did. So went and cut a load of budgets and cut out things that I seen that weren't turned into revenue. And we then got very efficient, and we were mad. And another thing I did was focus a lot on brand, which you don't typically see in volume SaaS. Like you see, okay, right, performance only, right? We need to be focusing on performance. But I was in a position as well where my back was against the wall a little bit. We were in COVID and nobody was really too sure which way things were going to go. So budgets were being cut anyway. And I was like, well, I still need to grow. Like there's still demand from investors and VCs to make sure that we're growing this business. So I just seen, we've got a database of like 100,000 people. Why don't I just start using this database and start like doing some webinars? And so very quickly we started doing these webinar series that then like started attracting like 2,000 people a week. So we'd have like 2,000 people on a webinar every week, right? So it became like this thing that Leadfeeder were doing these awesome webinars, and it just sort of blew up, right? And everybody was like, we shouldn't do that because it's putting effort on the focus on the team, because that they should be focused on performance marketing. I'm like, we don't have the money for performance marketing, so let's just try, right? And very quickly we started to see that we were spending like 30% of what the budget was originally from a performance marketing perspective to tighten the purse strings a little bit. And at the same time, we were still managing to grow MRR 5% month on month. So
wow.
The brand play was massive. It had a massive impact. Now, timing was perfect in that as well because of what was happening with COVID, etc. But that was a play that typically SaaS companies weren't, or high volume SaaS companies were not doing, because it wasn't necessarily, it was an additional touch point in the journey. And you always want to avoid as many touch points as possible in volume SaaS because it's like an e-commerce play. You try to avoid demand gen and you're just doing pure lead gen, right? So that was really interesting. And then after a couple of years, look, as I mentioned, during COVID and everything, I have a young family and stuff. And after COVID, I was just wrecked, man. I was like, this is exhausting for me. And I wasn't really enjoying it anymore. And it was just, I knew that I was going to burn out. So I just stepped away and I just said, you know what, I need a break. And very quickly, people started reaching out to me being like, hey, I seen you left Leadfeeder. Would you be interested in full-time employment? And I was like, no, but I can give you a hand, I can help. And from there, it just sort of snowballed. Like, I didn't want to start a business. I hadn't planned to start a business, but the business just sort of started itself. And since then, that's 3.5 years ago, and worked with numerous brands, grown a team around me. I work on various levels of marketing consultancy, but also CMO at various companies, chief revenue officer at other companies, running SDR teams. You name it, I've done it, or I've got somebody on the team that can do it when it comes to marketing or sales. And that was a very, very long intro myself. My apologies. Monologue.
That was very, very good. There's so many fascinating things in there. Kind of the accidental entrepreneur being one of those that didn't necessarily want to start a company, and here you are, and have grown that and been really successful. In marketing, quadrupling revenue in 2.5 years is really significant. What are some key strategies that help you drive growth that significantly?
So one of the things, it depends on the model, right? So let's start with high ticket SaaS first, right? And then we can talk about volume SaaS. I think I've just given you an insight into the volume SaaS play that I typically focus on. But in high ticket SaaS, I would say it's not easier. It's maybe different, but maybe a bit easier. It's easier to break up markets, and it's easier to maybe get teams aligned, and you could throw more cash at customer acquisition than you can in a volume SaaS play.
Of course.
So because you've the lifetime value is higher, and therefore your customer acquisition costs can be higher, right? But when I'm looking at the high ticket SaaS thing, it's a couple of things I would do. First of all, what are the targets? What's the company target? What's the company number? What are you looking to hit? What are you trying to achieve as a business, right? Many founders will say, hey, look, I'm trying to get an exit in the next 3 to 5 years. Okay, what does that exit look like? What are VCs or private equity or PE firms or whoever you're talking to? What are they telling you? What are they telling you the revenue needs to be in order to get a decent valuation? And what are you looking for yourself, right? So we normally start with like founder targets or founder ideas, and then company level targets, which is, okay, what are we looking to grow by in the next XYZ amount of time? So I'd normally start with next year, or if I'm in this year, if I started midway through a year, what are we looking to do up until the end of the year? What are the current programs that we're running to do that? What are the sales teams broken up like? What are the marketing teams broken up like? Do you have an SDR team, etc., right? If I'm building it from scratch, let's say I have a blank canvas, which is never going to be the case, but if I'm looking at what I need my blank canvas to be, I would say, okay, we know that we need to grow the company by, let's say, 30% next year. That 30% might be going from 10 million to 13 million, right? And I say then, okay, so if I want to get to that 13 million ARR next year, let's look at breaking up the markets in terms of where we can get that from, right? That's only new business now. We're not even talking about expansion business yet, right? Well, let's look at like new territories and or let's look at where we can squeeze the orange a little bit more in some existing territories, right? There's one company that I work with, for example, they work in the sports betting and gaming space. They're a marketing automation platform. And that you can see that there's certain markets that are showing really, really high like opportunity value. So for example, the US market being a massive one because of state legislation changing in every state in the US to allow more online gaming, as an example, which having the states as a green field is completely new to me, because the states is always like, they're all like, the US is always the country that's the first movers in everything when it comes to tech, and Europe follows, right? Whereas now we're the actually opposite way around. So I would see for the likes of them, I'd be like, okay, well, let's focus on the US market. How can we make some traction in the US market quick? Because that's not going to stay greenfield forever. Then there's also tertiary markets around the US market. So I'm looking at them like, for example, countries in South America that are also seeing massive growth as well, and try to get after that, right? So once we then like figure out what our global target is, then we divvy it up across the regions and say, okay, like these are the regions, we have this particular effort, or we know that we have these particular opportunities in these regions. Now let's go build out like a TAM list. So total addressable market list for each of those regions that we're going after, so that we know all of the companies in which we can sell to. So based on that, then I'll tier out that list based on tier 1 to 3, tier 1 being your top level. You need to win them. Tier 2, maybe mid tier, and then tier 3 are like maybe long-term stuff or smaller players, right? And then I'd look at the teams. that we have. So let's look at how can we service the South American market. Do we have localized content? Do we have local feet on the ground? Do we have somebody that's able to speak Portuguese or Spanish? Do we have the platform in that language? Do we need it in that language? But we're doing like mini business plans for each of those different regions almost.
Yeah.
And then looking at how we can service it from a sales perspective, but also then how we can service it from a marketing perspective as well to give some air support to the sellers. Right. And I'd look the sellers team being very simple, AE, SDR, and then you've got marketing as air cover. SDRs going after some accounts that are probably not quite tier one, but maybe like between tier 2 to tier 1, because you want SDRs to be surrounding those accounts. Tier 1, top tier 1 customers, you want AEs to be really like building those relationships themselves rather than just doing this like bigger outreach effort on an SDR level. And then you're looking at marketing being like, okay, how can we get in and penetrate those accounts, especially if you're in a very crowded market. Let's say if you're in like a crowded category, the market itself might be quiet enough, but the category can be crowded. How can we do things that are standing out against competitors? So I'd always come up with personalized ideas. Like, for example, there's one company that I work with where one of the things that we offer is like a marketing cockpit, and that marketing cockpit helps you basically steer the plane. You know, as a CMO for large multinationals, like huge auto manufacturers and so on, we work with their global teams. One of the things that I would do is to help the SDR team get penetration into bigger accounts. For example, the Mercedes of this world, the BMWs of this world. We came up with an idea which was based on another concept which is called the crumpled letter technique, right? Whereby you write a handwritten note, crumple it up, put it in an envelope, send it out to the prospect. They get a piece of paper in the post that's crumpled up with a letter in it. I'm like, what the heck is this, right? So we did it with paper airplanes because of the marketing cockpit concept. So
nice.
Then the people, we wrote a handwritten note, made it into a paper airplane, sent that out in the post to high level. That cost us like 20 cents a send or something, like ridiculous. And we managed to get our foot in the door at those organizations. So they're the type of things like get marketing being creative. And then that's on the new business side. And then we need to look at, okay, existing business, or when we win accounts in those new markets, are we going to be able to service those accounts? Because this is really important, especially if you're with a company from Europe that's looking to go into the US. You might need to play it safe for a little bit of time, therefore only focus on East Coast accounts, which I've seen happen often to say, okay, we will service the East Coast, but the West Coast is going to be crazy because the fun will never stop for our CS team then, and people are going to be demotivated. It's going to be hard for us to find people on the ground so quickly, etc. So our customers are going to be unhappy, therefore we're going to see higher churn, etc. And that's before I even start looking at things like where are our expansion opportunities, which is very typical in high ticket SaaS, that people don't look at what they already have and figure out, okay, what's the strategy for us to grow in our existing account book? And it's like, well, we don't have one. I was like, well, why go and try to chase so much more new business, which is very, very difficult to do. Like think about in e-commerce, they say it costs 70% more to acquire a new customer than to retain an existing one. Why don't you just focus on retention? And by doing the retention strategies, you're also managing to grow those accounts and get more expansion revenue. So like that's before I even think of that. And then we break down the target as well, looking at new business versus expansion business, and then try to come up with a strategy around both of those, but I regionalize it. And again, monologue again, my apologies, but that's how I'd attack it.
There's so many gold nuggets in there, and I think marketers can make a lot of mistakes, and I've certainly made these in the past. You take that list, you get your TAM, and you go, okay, here's the TAM, and we're going to go after it, and you have one single strategy for the whole thing. But what you did is you took that down, and where a lot of companies might look at it and say, okay, we're going to be sales led, and we're going to have SDRs call into the list. But you actually broke it down to tier 1 is really account-based marketing. You have tier 2 where you're using an SDR and AE strategy. You got tier 3 where it's really email, or it's longer-term deals, or it's nurture. So it's not picking one, it's all of the above. And it's really segmenting those things into the right buckets and picking a strategy specifically for that piece of business, I think is brilliant. And I think it's something that's missed by a lot of companies.
Yeah, I think we call it plays, like just don't,
Yes.
I don't want people to think this is really complex or complicated and you need to have huge budgets to do it. I just told you that I was folding bloody paper airplanes and sticking them in envelopes.
Right.
I think the key is with account-based marketing is that you need to be creative. Of course, okay, if you're talking about digital channels, right, it can be expensive because you need to get expensive tech to do it. I wouldn't recommend it necessarily unless you really have the team to be able to deliver on that and you have large budgets to be able to like spend in those platforms, right? Because you could be spending anything from $100,000 a year for some of these bigger platforms, like 6 Cents, for example, is going to cost you almost $100K a year. Right. Sure. And then you've got budgets on top of that. Spend needs to go on top of that. Right. So,
right.
So yeah, like just start it easy and start it light. Like a while back when I'm in my lead feeder days, I actually wrote an ebook or maybe more of a book about it, which I can share if you want to share it with people. But
yes,
it
absolutely.
broke down account-based marketing very, very easily. Like what is account-based marketing? And how to set it up very easily without having big budgets, basically doing it on a shoestring, right? So yeah, I can send it on.
Oh, that would be fantastic. We'll make sure and link that in the show notes. One of the things that, as you mentioned earlier as well, was demand gen. And I think that the terms marketing and demand gen really kind of get used synonymously, but they're really different aspects. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you approach demand gen versus maybe lead gen or marketing?
Sure. So on demand gen, I think there's actually a crossover. So when you're talking about marketing, I'm going to assume you're referring to brand, perhaps, because marketing is also a broader term, right? Within marketing, you have different elements. So you'll have product marketing, you'll have growth marketing, which is more on the lead gen side. You'll have design and brand, etc. So let's just if we're talking about brand, I think brand and demand actually cross over quite a bit. Because they rhyme. No, not just because of that, but the thing is with demand gen, I have found that as you grow your demand gen efforts, like you're basically doing an education piece. So demand generation for me is educating the market on what a specific solution to a specific pain that they might have is, right? And I think by doing that on a larger scale, so if you're managing to be consistent with it week in, week out, then you're also driving brand recognition on what you're doing. And when it comes to demand gen, the best thing that I've seen from my experience for creating demand is pitching your trailer onto others. So if you're selling like a sales tech or a marketing tech, I'd be looking to utilize others within that space. So influencer marketing, right? So I'll go back to this webinar topic again. Like I've done numerous webinars across numerous companies for sales tech with the likes of Morgan Ingram, which drives then thousands of signups, right? He also, you can lean on his database as well. So he gets it out in front of people. Do the same with Aaron Ross, who wrote Predictable Revenue. I've got a good relationship with Aaron Ross. He'll happily jump on. Well, I say that now. He might watch and go, I'll never jump on it. But I say that, but I also did a podcast with him last week. So I guess I can lean on him again. But lean on their brands to accelerate or amplify yours, right? But at the same time, that also drives demand. If I go back to the point around these webinars that we did with Leadfeeder back in the day, and also I did this with another company called Base HQ as well, which we managed to do great work with as well in terms of growing the demand for what they had to offer. It was very much, we didn't focus on product during those things that we were doing. We never pushed product down people's throats, right? And we did product marketing thereafter, right? So we'd invite them onto a topic that would be very high level in terms of a sales pain point. Or that was with Leadfeeder or with Base, we were selling to executive assistance software. We'd focus on problems or solutions to problems that executive assistants might have. For example, burnout was a big issue there. So we'd had people on that would specialize in that, but we'd also have some very interesting guests on. For example, I managed to get on Barack Obama's assistant, for example, executive assistant. So like a guy called Reggie Love, right? And I had a half-hour conversation with him, and then we invited people to come to see that. And then following that, then we then put them into a nurture stream and get them more up to date around what we had to offer from a product perspective. But I'm not jamming product down people's throats, right? The way that I see it is like you're driving demand by covering topics which are in the area of what you have to offer from a product perspective. And there's a time and place for product. But once the timing gets right for that specific person that has been on that webinar or whatever you've done, has read that blog post or has downloaded that ebook, whatever it might be, then you're going to be top of mind. And if you keep in touch with that person on a weekly basis and offer them value that's not to do with your product, then when it comes to the time that they need your product, you will be the first to top of mind and they will come back to you. And I've seen that with Lead Feeder. As I mentioned, we cut budgets by 70% and still seeing the same amount of growth as we did beforehand because we were seeing 2,000 people come onto a webinar every single week. Right?
So good. Ready to dominate your market and skyrocket your revenue? Dive into Small Fish, Big Pond, building a world-class business that swims circles around competitors. This book is packed with powerful marketing and leadership lessons guaranteed to transform your business and operate world-class. Small Fish, Big Pond delivers proven strategies to sharpen your marketing message, deliver unmatched value to your clients, and guide your prospects' buying journey to one inevitable conclusion. Elementary, my dear Watson, your company is the only solution for them. Inside, you'll find step-by-step frameworks and time-tested growth principles to attract your ideal clients, convert them, and turn them into your passionate brand ambassadors. Get your copy today in print, ebook, or audio at smallfishbigpond.com or Amazon. Plus, remember, every single book sale supports charity. So dive in and make a difference.
So that's my view on that. People have been known to fight me on it, so feel free to. But that's what I've seen, right?
Well, it works, and when you can get 2,000 people like that showing up regularly, and you're really building that relationship, building the affinity, you become the obvious solution.
100%.
Far better to have an audience like that that's engaged and showing up and knows your brand and loves it than just advertising out there to the cold masses.
100%. You're, as you said, you hit the nail on the head there. You're creating relationship, right?
Yes.
And that was the big difference. Like people were reaching out to us every single week. Same people coming on asking the same questions or different questions to the same people, and like a real following happened, you know. Yes. And that was just, it wasn't, never thought in my wildest dreams that would happen, but it did, right? And we just capitalized on it and kept going and going and going and going, right? So there you go.
Well, what are some big mistakes that founders make in marketing?
They try to run marketing even though they're not marketers. So
does it take a little pushback sometimes?
Oh, Jesus,
founders want to do it one way, and you're like, "No, that's not right."
So, like, the issue is they normally have their first marketing hire is normally somebody that's quite junior. So unless that junior person is like, I don't know, a genius and like is able to just figure it out very quickly and understand things very well and has like a demeanor that's incredibly strong and being able to push back against a very ambitious founder, then you're going to find that they're not going to be the founder themselves are not going to be very happy with the outcomes of what they're doing from a marketing perspective, because that person as a marketer is waiting on guidance or direction from the founder. Right. And founders typically look around and they see something and go, "Oh, shiny thing, quickly, do that." And then
I might have done that a time or two.
It's normal, right? It's completely normal. Don't get me wrong. Like,
of course.
So I see it all the time, and I've been in the position of the junior marketer of being like, "Oh, sure, yeah, I'll go do that." But I've learned the hard way to be like, "Hey, this is a terrible idea." Like I literally call founders out nowadays. Like the position that I'm in nowadays, I work with so many companies. I don't have time to get into that political game anyway.
Right.
So I'm just very direct. But if I ever find myself in full-time employment, if I ever find myself in a full-time CMO role again, that's one thing I'll take in with me. There'll be just like, cut through the bullshit, just like immediately like, no, this is like not a good idea. And here's why. Here's why I don't think it's going to work. And that's the important part. If you just say no, then you just come across like not very nice person.
Right,
You don't come across favorable. If you're able to come across, no, but here's the reason why I don't think that's going to work. And if you're still getting pushback on it and you still manage to articulate your point and you're still getting pushback on it, then maybe there's something in it. But most founders want to keep their teams as efficient as possible and don't want to do things that don't make sense.
Right.
So if you're able to, and if you're constantly telling your founder things that don't make sense and you still have to go and do them and it still doesn't make sense and it doesn't have any outcome after you said it doesn't make sense, then you need to leave that job. That would be my advice.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And those impromptu projects or the shiny objects, they really get in the way of strategy. How important is it to really have a strategy and a methodology for going after a market and really executing and sticking to that versus just doing a bunch of stuff that might work? You
need to balance both because there will be both, right? So if you're in a startup or a scale up, startup's worse than scale up, but if you're anywhere, like let's do it in different stages. So if you're talking 1 to 5, or if you're talking 1 to 5 million ARR, right? That's like scrappy. Everybody rolls up their sleeves and everybody gets a bit of a job done and everybody's doing this, that, and the other. And it's just all about grow, no matter what, right? 5 to 10, you're like, okay, we need to just make sure that we're like creating some reliable process here so that we're able to deliver on stuff. But there will still be like a certain wave of that like founder-led stuff coming through the door at you, but you still should be following a map, which is your plan, right? Like I go into so many companies that don't have a plan. There is zero plan. It's like, let's just do all the things and this is everything and we're doing everything all at once. It's like, okay, but with what outcome, expected outcome? How can we measure things? How can we track if we're actually hitting goals and targets, etc., right? And when it gets to 10 to 20, if we got 10 to 20 rather than 10 to 15, I think especially when you get up towards that 20 thing, you really need to be implementing a plan. And that plan needs to be driven by a number of people within the marketing org. At that point, you should have built up an organization within marketing that are then focused on certain disciplines within marketing. And you as a CMO would go be aligning on the top level with the rest of the C levels, mostly with chief revenue officer, whoever's in charge of the sales org, and CEO, and most likely CFO is becoming a more and more important role to align with marketing nowadays. So you basically align on the top level and then you get the teams below you to really drive what's happening in that plan. And then you sit down with them together, decide on what's going to happen, what's not going to happen. And then they're the ones to go and execute. And then you can also help in a certain way. But if you keep on getting stuck in operational stuff, you're never going to be able to deliver on the strategy. So like it depends on the level of the business. So let's say all the way from 1 up to 10, I still think 1 to 10 million, that is, you're still going to be getting into the nitty gritty and being very operational as a CMO. It's just how it is. 10 to 15, you're still going to have some of that, but you're going to be trying to move into a more strategic role. 15 onwards, you need to be stepping back a little bit and having a better overview of how you can move it forward, because very quickly you'll find that as a founder or CEO will be like, oh, this person isn't strategic enough. They're getting themselves too caught up in things. And you'll find yourself out of a job pretty quickly.
Well, what about maybe some considerations for adding the marketing function, say the $3 to $10 million range? What should founders be thinking about? What should they be looking for? Or maybe what should they avoid?
For marketing, I've seen people make the mistake whereby they take on like a very seasoned marketer or CMO from another organization that's more established. So they're like looking at some of their competitors or similar players in the space that have gotten to like 100 mil. Or let's say 50 to 100 mil, something like that. And they're like, this person knows exactly how it's done. And maybe they do know exactly how it's done. But does that person want to go and get stuck into trenches with whatever band of merry men you might have on the current marketing team? You may not. Right. You may have a couple of people, like a handful of people that don't have too much experience, that will require a lot of hand holding. You're going to have to lead the way. You're going to have to lead by example. You're going to have to go and do the things that you may not want to do, right, as a CMO. So like often I've seen that, and that's a very expensive mistake, right? I've seen them come in like, and they see a CMO that's brought a company from 10 to 50. They've been there through the entire journey. And then you're like, brilliant, perfect fit, knows exactly how it works, knows exactly how to do it, knows how to structure the team. And then they come on board and they're like, I actually don't want to do this again operationally.
Right.
I was like, well, that's not going to work. So that's like one of the key mistakes that I see being made when they're looking for a marketing leader. I think you need to, first and foremost, you need to look at somebody that has a bit of experience, but not a massive amount of experience. Like they don't need to have that 10 to 50, but maybe they have like 10 to 20, right?
Right.
Or they're in a competitive space. You nip them from a competitor and they're just at the end of that journey, maybe from the 3 to 10, as you just mentioned. So like if they've gone beyond the 20, you may have already lost them, right? There's not many fits that like would bring a company all that way and then want to go back and start to roll up the sleeves again.
Right.
So you need to then lean on them to, if you bring them in, you need to lean on them to know what team to build, so that you as a CEO are not having to get too ingrained in what's happening from hiring perspective for the marketing team. You need to be careful from a cultural perspective to make sure that if you're scaling the team, that people are good culture fit. That's important. But you should give some free rein to the marketing leader to make sure that they're bringing in the right people to get the job done, right? But you need to then make sure that the marketing plan that they're putting in place is actually the right one for the business. So you also then have the right to veto things. Don't go blindly trusting either that it's all going to work out. You still need to be super critical. And I've seen that happen before where they're like, oh, this guy must know what they're talking about. And then actually, for whatever reason in the other organization, they managed to grow it so well because they had a great product market fit or the timing was right or whatever. No two companies are the same. So you know your company better than any other. So you still need to steer the ship there, but you should be able to give as much rein over to the new leader as possible.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense. And every company is different. And I've seen that happen way too many times where somebody was just in a really good hot market or brand recognition, and then they go to another company and it flops because they don't have those tailwinds. Yeah, they were lucky, not good. Is there a good way to really help make that determination whether somebody really has the right skills to get you from point A to point B and over the next 2 or 3 years? Or is it harder to really say for sure?
It's funny. I when I'm going through the interview process, especially for like more senior marketers, so if I've helped companies now like hire CMOs. I'd always like lean into my network from people. Like I've got a broad network on LinkedIn and I'm normally connected with somebody that I'm trying to place. Sure. And I would also be connected with some of their contacts and perhaps some of the people that they've worked with before. I would always like do a bit of behind the scenes homework with those people, like check in with them. What's your advice? What would you say about this person, etc. Right? You'll find that people don't, especially if you know them, they don't want to tarnish their reputation for recommending somebody that's not that great. Like you should try to go after your first level connections to make sure that like they're not giving you any bull, right? They would tell you what's what, right?
Yes.
And what I found is as well is in the interview process, let's start with the interview process itself. I've got a couple of things that I always do in interviews. One thing is if I'm hiring for a senior role, there's always going to be a project, which is clear, right? But the project is normally like, put together a marketing plan for me for the next year. Show me what that will look like from your side. Like, what would you do? What would you change? Throw everything. I say to people, hey, like, don't put too much effort into it. Like whatever you do it, whatever way you want to present it, and just give it to me whatever way. And I can tell very quickly if they put effort into it or not. If they're really, that shows me hunger, right? If somebody spends the time and actually puts the time and effort into it and makes this like look good and they have good concepts and good ideas, that like is much better than somebody like taking my word for it saying, hey, yeah, don't spend too much time in it. Like I know for me, if somebody says to me, don't spend too much time in it, I'm going to spend like an entire weekend or whatever it is putting this thing together and making sure that it looks awesome in comparison to the people that I'm going up against in this role. But I know, and that's how I would approach a role in an organization, right? That's how I run my team. I'm always trying to take it up another level, right? I always see it like I'm a competitive person. So that's the type of thing I'm looking for as well. It's not just the concept, but how do they present it, right? And if they come up with great ideas and so on, that's what I have in the project. Another thing is as well that I ask in every single interview process early on is describe to me or describe to my mother what that specific company does that you're interviewing for. So let's say I'm interviewing for a marketing automation platform. Let's say I'm interviewing for HubSpot, right? As a CMO of HubSpot. Tell me exactly what HubSpot does and explain it to me in a way that my mother would understand. My mother has no idea about tech, right? So, and very quickly I can tell if they get it or if they've not done any research whatsoever, which is often the case as well. You find that people don't do any research, right?
Which is crazy.
And I've had, which is mental. I've had that this week as well, and in a senior role, right, where a person told me, I didn't really look too much. They even told me, on the I was like, immediately you're done. Like that's right. That's the end of it. Then once I do the project, I put them through a gauntlet with the other C-levels. So they need to deliver the project to the other C-levels, and they need to take questions. So that's normally an hour and a half session or so, right? And then once you do all of that due diligence and you've also had them through all the different C-levels, etc., then you can say, okay, is this person going to be a good fit for this organization or not? So that's my process, and it's worked.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, you're really getting that feedback all around. I love the LinkedIn asking, kind of getting those back channel questions. Would you recommend this person? And that's saved me in the past as well. Particularly sales hires. I mean, 75% of salespeople miss their quota. I've never seen a resume where they aren't like way over quota. So I don't know how those things square.
Sales is a nightmare, man. It's a nightmare, especially if you're trying to hire as a European organization in the US, because Americans sell themselves so well. Europeans. We do not sell ourselves well. Like Europeans we're terrible people, whipping ourselves, Whereas Americans are very open and like, we did that and this is going to be excellent. It's going to be amazing, blah, blah, blah. And Europeans are eating out of their hand, right? I've seen that happen so many times with sellers because the seller is going to sell you. That's what a seller does, That's the thing. But American sellers in particular are really good at selling themselves. So you need to be super stringent in a process where you're hiring in the States. That's my experience, right?
Yes, without a doubt. What are some advantages to hiring a fractional CMO in a fast-growing startup versus going ahead and just hiring somebody full-time?
Well, I've mentioned price already, right? So let's not just focus on like a monthly fee type of thing, but also in an opportunity cost perspective. So there's two sides of this. First of all, you don't need to pay for headhunters, which you typically should do. If you're looking for somebody good, you should be working together with a recruitment company, right? A headhunter. On top of that, the speed at which we can start, right? So you're not paying a headhunter, which is typically 20% of annual salary. So let's say a good CMO is going to cost you 200 to 250K in SaaS, right? Right. Maybe plus the rest, right? And you're paying 20% premium on that. You're talking about 50K for you to hire somebody, right? Which is a lot of money for a startup. It's an expensive mistake. It's an expensive mistake, right? Whereas if you go fractional, you don't need to worry about that. Typically, I can only talk for myself, but I can start in the morning. You need the support now. Let's go, right? Like, what are we waiting for, right? You don't have a lengthy period of where they're not able to work because they need to then go and hand in their notice. In the States, it's not as bad. It's normally a 2-week notice period, but for more senior positions, you're probably talking a bit longer, maybe. But and then normally people want to take a bit of a break in between roles. So you're probably talking about a process that can go on before you actually have a CMO in the door. You're probably talking 4 months if you're lucky. Yes. Right. Whereas we're talking with me, you can do it in 4 hours if you want,
Especially for a fast-growing company, that's what you need. You've got to be able to move quickly and get results.
Speed, exactly. Yes. All of my contracts as well. This is another point to go back to the costing. All of my contracts are very simple. If you're not happy, I'm not happy. So we just quit it in a day. Like I Pay me what you owe me, and then we're done. I don't want the client to be unhappy. And if I'm unhappy, I want to be also able to get out of there, because also I've been in companies before where it's, the relationship's not great. So like it works both ways. But that to you as a startup founder should be very favorable, right? The fact that like you can get rid of me in the morning. If you like, hey, this Andy guy, Jesus Christ, I can't be dealing with this guy. Then no worries, I'm out of there. I don't want to be that headache for you. I'll even help you find somebody to replace me. That's no problem at all, right? If you need that, there's no love lost there, right? That's the thing, right? So and on top of that, you get, so to go back to price again, you also get a like I've got experience now working with over 20 SaaS companies in the past 10 years, right? So, and I've seen everything. Like you cannot imagine, there's one weird situation that you can think of. I have definitely seen it somewhere, right? So, and on the team as well, I also have additional marketing resource on my team now, other fractional marketers in content and design and brand and product marketing and marketing operations, digital marketing. They also, amongst us all, we have experience in over 70 SaaS companies. So,
Andy,
like that's, you can take those learnings, and at any one time, we're working with multiple organizations. So we're seeing what's happening on a macro level, and things that are working in others where we can go and implement it at your organization. Right. And it's the first time in my career where I've really had that much data across many different companies to be like, oh shit, this is actually working pretty well. Let's implement this thing that I'm seeing work on LinkedIn here. Or, you know what, Capterra ads are working really well. Let's like double down on that here. Like it's, as I said, like to have access to that data is not something you're going to get from a full-time CMO. They're not going to have that insight into other organizations. Right. So I think to summarize, like there's a lack of risk there. You're definitely going to be saving yourself money. And it's the level of experience that you're able to bring in at a fraction of the cost, as well as being able to act quickly on trends that are happening on a macro level because it's being seen elsewhere.
Yeah, so good. Well, where can people learn more about you online?
Sure. You can get me on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn is probably the best spot to get me on. I've just launched a go-to-market. We don't like to call ourselves an agency, but for all intents and purposes, a go-to-market agency that is incorporating all of those different fractional resources that I just mentioned before. That's called Purple Pickle, and you can find us at purplepickle.io. We've just launched a podcast as well, Pickle Juice, which you'll find on my LinkedIn as well. We're talking to very interesting people, a lot of founders, a lot of people that have seen big exits. For example, Aaron Ross, Predictable Revenue, the founder and CEO or founder and chief revenue officer of ReachDesk, Alex Ollie, Ohad Hecht, who's the founder, or not the founder, the CEO of Amarsis during the exit, but now the founder of Amplify, and many, many, many more. But you can find me LinkedIn. You'll find all that stuff on my LinkedIn.
Excellent. We'll make sure and link that in the show notes as well. Andy, great conversation. So much good stuff in here. I really appreciate you being on SaaS Fuel.
Sure. Thanks for having me on, Jeff.
Thanks again, Andy, for coming on the show and sharing your insights and resources. You can learn more about Andy at andyculligan.com, and be sure to check him out on socials as well. As always, all links, highlights, resources, and full show notes are available at saasfuel.com. And of course, our YouTube channel as well, at Champion Leadership, full episodes, video shorts, training, outtakes, and quite a bit more. Thought leaders share. Share this episode with a leader you know who is most likely to give away the best candy today. Everyone who shares this week gets an A/B testing ghost costume. Just drape yourself in 2 half sheets, one red, one blue, with a question mark on your forehead. Every time somebody tries to talk to you, just switch sides and ask which one you like better, red, blue. And then just scribble down notes like you're tracking conversions. Well, join us next Tuesday, where our founder is Kamal Maheshwari, co-founder of DCube and a 28-year veteran in the data space. He'll be sharing his journey from Oracle, Cloudera, and more, leading up to building the first data trust platform. And then next week on our SaaS Fuel Expert Series, we have Leslie Shreve, productivity expert and founder of Productive Day. She'll be sharing her proven system for increasing efficiency by up to 300%. That's pretty cool. And of course, reclaiming hours in your day. Anyone busy? This is definitely for you. So I will see you next time. Y'all be safe out there. Get out there and vote and just ignore all the other political craziness outside of that. And as always, enjoy the journey.
Thanks for listening to SaaS Fuel. Full show notes for each episode, which includes a summary, key takeaways, quotes, and any resources mentioned, are available at saasfuel.com. Be sure to follow and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're enjoying the content and getting value from these episodes, please leave us a rating and review at ratethispodcast.com/SaaSfuel. We'll be sure to read these out on future episodes.